Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and what's next. It's a show that asks questions and peels back the layers of our average everyday experience and goes beyond scratching the surface. We interview people doing incredible things who are making a difference around the globe. Join me as we listen in and get one step closer to understanding that big ideas shared create collaboration. Collaboration can inspire community, and communities create social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face. So my next interview on Face to Face is with Ron Chapman. He's a returning guest. He's a filmmaker, a storyteller, director, writer, producer. He was on Face to Face quite a few years ago, episode 170, The Poet of Havana. Check it out. You can find that online for sure. And he's back some 400 episodes later, 400 interviews later. That's actually not including live interviews, so it's even more than that. So it's really great to have him back, but also a thrill for me just to see sort of where we've come in the last couple of years. From Earth to Sky, Shelter are the 2 of 3 films that Ron released this year. He's a pretty busy guy. You're going to have to listen in to hear what he does in his spare time. But you're going to also hear about these 2 beautiful films. I learned a ton. They are compelling. They're interesting. They're entertaining. They are fascinating from a Canadian perspective, a historical perspective, but they also have universal stories to tell, universal themes to tell, where we talk about education and learning and about learning and about documentaries as a thesis statement. Ron talks a great deal about that. From Earth to Sky is about Indigenous architects and Turtle Island and what this part of the world was like before those pre-colonial borders and boundaries were imposed. We talk about reconnecting to the past through architecture. This is a story about collaboration. It's about conversation and community and common ground. Where does one's inspiration come from is a question that we ask. We talk about Indigenous versus mainstream architecture and how this became a lens for Ron and for those who are going to see the film for a way forward, a beacon, as one of the Indigenous architects talks about in the film. And this is a group of men and women from around North America speaking. I believe this is a direct quote from the film, but speaking from the heart, and it's about a sustainable future. It's about a way forward. It's about a new vision for our cities. And again, it's just such a beautiful film. Shelter, also a film that you're going to need to see, talking about architecture and buildings from a different perspective, but definitely rooted in history and xenophobia and racism but this sense of overcoming, and how it's better to give than to take, and how some of these folks and these entrepreneurs speak about buildings as being, wait for it, irreplaceable assets. How beautiful, how cool is that? It's, as I say in the interview, it's good, it's beautiful, it's true. Ultimately, buildings, these inanimate objects, take on a relational, spiritual, philosophical quality, and that kind of lends back beautifully from to the film From Earth to Sky. So check it out. Stay tuned. International distribution coming your way soon. Can be seen on a variety of different places online. So look for those. ChapmanProductions.ca is where you can find out more about Ron. And if you want to learn more about the work I'm doing, davidpecklive.com is the best place to go. You'll find Face to Face there. You'll find a host of other interviews, and we've got lots more planned for this year, and no sign of me stopping anytime soon, I don't think. I just love it all too much, and I hope if you do too, you'll leave me a review on iTunes. Sign up for our newsletter. Please sign up for the YouTube channel and like us there. And if you can, leave us a review on iTunes. Again, that would be brilliant for so many reasons. Getting word on the street about what we do is so important. So stay tuned. Ron Chapman, a guest today on Face to Face, talking about his 2 new films, From Earth to Sky and Shelter. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We're joined by a very special guest here with us today, a returning guest, actually, to Face to Face. We have Ron Chapman here with us somewhere in Northern Ontario, Canada. It's looking pretty beautiful in the background, and I can tell everyone it's not just a digital image. It's the real thing. Ron, thanks for joining us today on Face to Face.
Thanks so much. Great to be here, David. Thank you.
So you've been very busy this year, very strange year to be releasing movies. Projects you've been working on for years, heart and soul and mind wrapped up in these things. Tell me a little bit about what you've been up to, and can you connect that to this strange COVID-like experience for a storyteller, for an artist, for a filmmaker?
Sure. Well, I've released three films this year since January. The first was in January, and it's a film I've been working on for a long time, on and off. I did a film called The Poet of Havana with Carlos Varela, Jackson Brown, and Benicio del Toro, and that was based around a Cuban artist, Carlos Varela. I recorded a few concerts with him, and it was always my intention to do a concert film. So his complete works could be seen, heard, and understood. Carlos has been called the Bob Dylan of Cuba. Jackson Brown calls him one of the greatest writers of our time. His writing and the depth of what he writes and says, it's universal, and really everybody and anybody should try and have a look uh, to understand who this artist is and what he is, because he is that great. But I wanted to make this concert film, so over the years I finally got it done, and this year I released it in January. And I released two other films. I released a film called Shelter that I've been working on for about 4 years, which was released in early June. And I released a film, From Earth to Sky, at the end of June. So those three
So I
films,
think the first question really, Ron, is what do you do in your spare time? I think that's the really most important question for you to answer today.
well, work on the next film.
Yeah, that's right.
But no,
Well,
I, I'm also I play music. I'm a musician,
okay.
and I love music, and it's
It's great.
part of what feeds me. So I do
Yeah,
that.
it's cool. Which, hey, listen, I can already hear us talking about your next project, but maybe we'll save that for the end of the interview. The Poet of Havana was the interview that you and I did, believe it or not, Ron, episode 170 on Face to Face, several podcasting platforms ago.
Yeah.
The technology wasn't there as it is today, and that's almost 400 interviews ago
Yes.
for me on Face to Face. So how crazy is that? And not that much time has passed, but anyway, again, thanks for being here today. And I need to say congratulations too on From Earth to Sky and Shelter, both beautiful films, moving. Compelling on so many levels, and I learned a ton, not only historically, but I think I stepped into this thing called architecture in a whole new way. And I've got to start with a little bit of a quote here. And listen, we can talk about From Earth to Sky, we can talk about Shelter. I mean, we'll just see where this all takes us. But I think, I really do need to let our listeners know where they can see these films. But this is the quote we're going to come back to. Quote, a reconnection to the past and an expression of a people with modern building materials, close quote. I mean, talk about contrast and juxtaposition in this simple quote. But before we dive into that, Ron, where can people see From Earth to Sky and Shelter?
Well, both these films I've released so far only in Canada. They're both about to do an international circuit in terms of festivals over the next
Fantastic.
year, and then we'll settle and find various broadcasters. We're talking with a variety of them now, but my intention really, and I had a need to release them with these broadcasters because I had obligations and they
Sure,
had.
of course.
Right. So Shelter was released with Rogers on Omni as a main platform, and From Earth to Sky I did with TVO, and so it's available on TVO as well as their YouTube platform.
So that's great. Well, all the best with the festival run, and hopefully you can get back face to face and in front of a live audience and feel that sort of energy in the room with two of these films. Again, beautiful films. From Earth to Sky, a reconnection to the past and an expression of a people. Is that where you started as you thought about stepping into this story From Earth to Sky?
You know what? I'm always drawn by stories and by what I'm going to learn. I'm a sort of high school dropout. I didn't get to do theses and things like that, and I look at each documentary as sort of my opportunity to do a little thesis
Nice.
and learn about something, and then take that learning and try and position it in such a way within the film that other people can see what I saw or be enlightened in the way I was enlightened. Earth to Sky was really interesting. It came to my attention that a group of architects, 18 Indigenous architects, had won the RFP to represent Canada at the Architectural Biennale in Venice. And they were going to present at the Canada Pavilion, what was Indigenous architecture.
Right.
So my first question was, what is Indigenous
Yeah.
architecture?
Yeah.
I
Who
never
knew?
really, I mean, I know what a teepee is, but what is Indigenous architecture? And what is it today, or what is it then, and what is their story? So I was fascinated by that. I was That's what got me started. And as I dug a bit deeper, I found out that these 18 Indigenous architects were not from Canada. They were from what's called Turtle Island, and which is the pre-colonial borders before there was Canada, America, Ontario. It's all the nations and where they lived, and so there were architects involved in this Canadian Pavilion presentation that were from Arizona or were from New York, and I'm like, well, that's weird. How come Canada has Americans at this presentation? And of course, a little more digging, the realization came that, which I knew, of course, but that many of these nations don't even recognize Canada as a sovereign nation. And so, well, wait a second. They don't recognize Canada as a sovereign nation. They're going to this biennale representing Canada, the Canada Pavilion, but they're not all Canadians. They're Americans also, or are from American soil. I went, wow, that's weird. And what is Indigenous architecture? And further to that, because my understanding of many architects is there's so much about themselves and their vision and what they attach and what is their brand. I went, how do 18 architects agree on anything? So I thought that it would be fascinating to try and follow this journey to Venice. I was actually calling it the Road to Venice at the time. And I went
Nice.
to, but at the same time, it was a delicate time to even consider this because I'm not Indigenous and it's an Indigenous story. And so I went to Douglas Cardinal and spoke to Douglas and told him what I wanted to do and what my intention was. And he listened. We had a great connection. He said he was going to go and talk with his elders and come back. And he went to the elders and came back to me and he said, the elders really feel that this is a good thing, that what you want to do is a good thing, and that our collaborating on this and doing it together is a good thing, that there needs to be more of this. So as opposed to, only Indigenous people can do this, and he really saw this and they saw this as a way that we can sort of come together and find more of a common ground. And so he supported me, and the other architects all came on board and were wonderful. But then I found I couldn't even begin to make that film for a variety of reasons, that they were all over the place in terms of how that came together. I couldn't just make a film about this presentation they were going to do in Venice, but while I was doing it, I got to know the architects and I went, wow, look at these people, look at these successful Indigenous architects that are so evolved and so attuned to the world, to our environment, to communities, to their history, and to just the situation right now. I went, they're amazing, and I'm going to follow them. So I followed some of those architects, and that was just an incredible education. I went with
Yeah, I
them to
bet.
their communities. I sat in their council meetings. I got to understand how they approached projects. I saw them with clients, and it was the greatest education one could ever have. And before this, going into this, I went, I always thought I sort of knew more about Indigenous peoples and nations than most people. I've had connections, but I realized after I did this how little I really knew and how much there was to know.
So a humbling experience by the sound of it in some
Yes,
respects. And honestly, the more I learn, the more I don't know. And I think
exactly.
I'm just thinking of an old Henley song right now, that where he talks about that. And I guess maybe as he turned mid-50s, he was willing to at least admit that. It was on one of his late. Anyway, I'll see if I can dig it up, and I'll refer back to it in my introduction. No, I'm with you, Ron. I think I love the backstory to how you stepped into it. You talked about collaboration and I think consensus, and of course, there's a community there that you stepped into. Did you ever get any pushback from Indigenous folks saying, "Oh, you know what, we really need to tell this story ourselves? Or was it more of a, wow, this is amazing. This guy wants to listen. He wants to make this with us. So there was more a sense of participation, because I think it is a sensitive issue these days. And,
Yes.
and, and at what point, does the poet like yourself get to look in and say, this is a story that needs to be told, and I hope I can do it.
Yeah, well, certainly from the architects that I worked with as a community, they were only helpful, only supportive,
So good.
and I mean, I told them what my intentions were,
Of
and,
course.
and my intentions, what I said to them in the beginning is, I'm not looking to tell Indigenous communities anything they don't know. I'm not going to pretend to tell. It's the same as what I did with Cuba in my Cuban films. I was never trying to tell Cubans about their history and who they were and what they were. That's ridiculous. But I said, I think that, me being able to convey, in this case, to colonists or non-Indigenous peoples, what I learned and what I saw, I thought that therein lies the opportunity for me. That's what my initial goal was with the film, is to reach out to other people to experience what I experienced, and the awakening and the understanding
So
that I
good.
experienced.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, isn't? I mean, wow, isn't that to some degree what it's about? Awakening and understanding. And I think
Yeah.
your comment about how you approach documentaries as a way to learn. I hope lots of people step in, because in order to learn, you sort of have to have, your eyes need to be open, your ears need to be open. So it presupposes a certain amount of listening. Let's hope most Canadians and most North Americans and us in the West can spend the next 5 to 10 years listening, and maybe much longer than that. But we've got lots of work to do, and I think I learned a ton from this film. And
Yeah.
what I was struck by was the forward thinking of it all, like the what's her name, Tam, is it Tammy Eagle Bull, the first
I
woman
mean,
Indigenous architect? I mean, how did she, to do that in any culture is going to be challenging, right? And yet she stepped in and eyes wide open, and did incredible work. And I was blown away too at the breadth of this, the width, the breadth, and the depth of Indigenous architecture. So I think it's a brilliant thing. And I think what was really beautiful for me was to see the human being wrapped up in a building,
mhm.
like this. There's this sense of indwelling or something, that this isn't a building material. This is about the future. It's about our past. It's about our traditions. It's about people. It's about sustainability, right? And this, yeah, go.
And community.
And community.
And community.
Yeah, yeah,
Most importantly, about community,
yeah.
because all those things fall under community. You
Yeah,
know, uh,
it's
I'm sorry.
no,
Yeah.
no, it's good. It's good. As you talk to some of these architects, did you get this sense that they were in this for uh, this architectural field for other reasons? Does that make sense? That there was more going on than just, oh, this is a career that I'm going to choose. This is I mean, we're talking about I don't typically think of an architect as an artist, Ron, but
Yeah.
I can't
They
not
are.
think of an artist after meeting some of these people, well, all of these people.
Yes, absolutely right. Well, I mean, firstly, they are all artists, and I mean, I believe architects are artists at their core. What they have to do, what they have to create, they're artists that have all these parameters around creating art, in a sense. And then the question is, where does that inspiration come for their art and for that construct? I think that all of them saw that artistic opportunity to do that. I believe that, and Tammy talks about that, and her father talks about that in the film. That they've only, Douglas Cardinal, who was the first architect in Canada. Indigenous peoples were not allowed to be architects. That was not a field that was open to them. They couldn't remain Indigenous and be an architect. In the same way, they couldn't be lawyers. How could they defend themselves and protect themselves? It's part of what we perpetrated on these
Mhm.
people. So Douglas, was the one who broke the barrier and became an architect. Why did he become an architect? their communities didn't have a say in what was being built for them, what was being presented to them, because they had had all their land taken away and all the other rights taken away. And all of a sudden, they're getting these metal boxes dropped on, and that's where you're going to live. And so for a lot of them, it was very much about reclaiming their culture and reclaiming control over who they are and what they are and how they're represented, how they live, how their communities work and interact, and what is the purpose of these things that we build, and who does it serve, in fact?
I think the question of who does it serve is beautiful. I forget who it was in the film, but talked about these pieces, these architectural pieces, these buildings, as beacons for the community. I mean,
Yeah.
what a beautiful thing. Now, maybe I haven't studied architecture, but maybe that is sort of a core principle. But it seems to me that there was something very rooted and very human about what these particular architects were doing. I love that Tammy, she designed a building. Was it a schoolhouse? And she went and got feedback from children to speak into what this building should ultimately be and how it should look like and how it might function. So it's not just functionality. It's not a utilitarian. It's very much a spiritual and a philosophical exercise, or creation is a much better word.
100%. And that is, again, part of their process. Whether it be a school or whether it be a community building, whatever, their process really is to go in to talk to the kids, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, to
Yeah.
talk to the
Yeah.
13-year-olds, to talk to the 18 to 20-year-olds, to talk to the parents, to talk to the teachers, and to talk to the elders of the community, and gather everybody's input as to what this building should serve, who it should serve, and what should be satisfied within the construct of this building for the community. And then from that, they then start developing what is the building, which, and you would note, of course, that within the film they talked about indigenous architecture and mainstream architecture, and some of them, not all of them just work for indigenous communities. They branched out and they serve other communities, and their process for what it is they build and how they build it, is so different in terms of an indigenous community and what they would call a mainstream project, because the representation and the input and the reason for the building existing is doesn't go through anything like the processes that an indigenous building would go through.
Who said in the film, and I can't remember, but just things like the idea of a vision, beacon, sustainability, community, and so on. But somebody said people are entwined in the architecture in the film, and I love that all of a sudden a building made out of steel, wood, these inanimate objects takes on a relational quality.
Yeah.
And this is a place where you don't just come in from the rain. You might come in from the rain, but you're also going to gather here. You're going to tell stories together. You're going to you experience life together. I don't know. I think it's genius on so many levels. And I wouldn't it be interesting and brilliant if this film and these stories became a part of, and maybe it is already, architectural education into the future. This is yeah. Anyway, is that too idealistic, Ron? What do you think?
Well, firstly and foremost, I had hoped that, and what I noticed and what I saw, as I went through the film, was I would hope that I would be able to use architecture as a lens for people to disarm people, and then therefore to better understand and to be brought into an understanding of indigenous cultures, history, traditions, and the people, with a positive narrative, with positive role models, not dwelling all the time on whose land and how do we give back the land and how much money do they get and all of this, and you can't do this and you can't do that and all these things, that truth and reconciliation, and there's been no truth still, but all these things we've spent, hundreds of millions of dollars on, they have not made a dent in the psyche of the country, to a great extent, and part of it is because they keep having, how do we settle, how do we settle, how do we settle, and I've had a huge response from this film by so many people from different generations who have said, I never I'm seeing indigenous nations through new eyes. I never saw this before. And I think the reason for that is that because it's always dealing with the horror and these unresolved issues that we're fighting back and forth on. And people say, well, what are we going to do? Give them back to Toronto? We're going to give them back Ottawa? You can't do this. How do you go back on that? And you end up in this struggle. Well, here are these people, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the horrific history that they had to endure and overcome, but enough to position them in such a way that that they have all endured and they have all overcome those things, and they've all looked around and said, well, okay, but here I am. Now, what can I do? What can I do to move forward? What can I do to help my community? What can I do to be a good citizen? What can I do to work with the other people of this country to make this country better? What can I bring from our 30,000 years of history and knowledge to these people to help fulfill the promise that we were given when they first landed, that we would have co-stewardship of this land. And they screwed us on that 1,000 times over, and we haven't had that. But maybe there's a chance now that we can sit down and start sharing and moving forward together and sharing this knowledge. And I believe that is starting to happen. And I believe that this film really helps get that message out in a way that so many other things have been unsuccessful at, because they're only focusing on these unresolved issues as opposed to just positive role models, positive contribution, positive working together. Here's how we can go forward. This film actually gives an answer.
How, and we could
When I
probably
say this film, I mean I don't mean the film itself.
right,
Contained within the film, these architects and these representatives of their
right.
communities, they give the answer, because there's nothing but their words in this film and nothing but their story in this film. I did not impose in the film. It is their stories.
And I think you're absolutely right. And I think the line also that stood out to me, or the one of the underlying themes, and like any great doc, there's a lot more going on than meets the eye. Sure, this is about architecture, it's about the environment and so on, but there's so many layers, and it's the kind of film that I believe. I mean, when you were talking, Ron, about the question that sort of drove you into this film, it sounded like you were beginning to write your thesis. This could be a PhD thesis. In fact, if it hasn't been, I sure hope it will be. And wouldn't it be brilliant if this story, some architect somewhere decided to focus on Tammy Eaglebull's work and write a PhD on how this is going to change the world? Because the reality is, it is, and it will continue to. And I so love the notion of it's a vision for our cities.
Yeah.
I don't know that, especially during COVID and what a crazy time we find ourselves in, but where are we going to be with respect to community post COVID? When people are wearing masks, not wanting to get together, walking over to the other side of the road, et cetera, et cetera. But listen, I love the film. It's called From Earth to Sky. Everyone needs to see this film, Ron. I'm so hopeful for you that it's going to get wide release internationally, because again, I think there's a singular to a universal theme here. There's so much for all of us to learn, it seems to me. When you were making Shelter, another project that you released this year, was second of 3 projects that you released this year. By the way, folks, help me out here, Ron. It's chapmanproductions.ca, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Yeah. So chapmanproductions.ca, you can find out more about what Ron's up to, and maybe even what he does in his spare time. So check that out. Ron.
Also, just on Earth to
Yeah.
Sky, I'm just finishing some things with an architectural and art festival, film festival,
Cool.
that is going to be doing a New York, Toronto, Vancouver,
Beautiful.
LA, and Washington run, and I believe it could well be coming to the TIFF Theater later in the fall with that festival. So that's
Fantastic.
something that I'll let you know about.
Yeah, please. We'll keep our eye out for that. I don't know. I'd love to know what similarities you saw, the connections between From Earth to Sky and Shelter. I mean, was that an intentional decision to release them, or did it just kind of work out that way serendipitously over the past 4 or 5 years as they were coming together? Because there's definitely lots of crossover here, right?
Yeah. Well, it was not intentional to release them so close together. It's the last thing I ever would have done in my life, but I had really no choice because I had the broadcasters had schedules and we
Right.
had to adhere to them. And those schedules, I mean, it's not, I'm not saying that, unfairly, they were, everything was thrown out of whack because of COVID. So really a lot of this goes back more to COVID than anything else. And then it's just the serendipity of it all. That's where it ended up. But I will say that I was doing both those films at the same time. I would be going back and forth between the two, and it was really conflicting actually in a way, and yet very interesting to be working on these two films, because one film is about our original inhabitants of this country who had these colonists come in and take over the country and perpetrate all these horrific things on them, which they somehow managed to live through and have overcome. Uh, and the other film was about immigrants coming to this country and contributing to the building of that country, and but also who had overcome just huge horrific circumstances. Um, so, what was really similar about the two films is that these were two groups that really showed the strength of humanity to overcome unbelievable adversity, unbelievable horrors, and find a way to stand up and and move forward with life without giving up. I mean, the resilience that these two communities showed is so humbling and and heart wrenching.
In a nutshell, Shelter is to me similar on a lot of reasons, because it's about a vision for our cities, different vision, but it's about creating a space. It's about community still. One of the comments, and do you want to just tell our listeners really quickly the sort of the thematic of Shelter without giving too much away? It's not just about apartment buildings, but they play a pretty important role.
Well, I'll tell you that Shelter, I mean, for me, was a film. There was so much going on in America at the time in terms of the xenophobia around immigrants. Shelter came to me, and to me, it was a great story that that was necessary to tell, as there are many, many others with other immigrant groups, that have the contribution of immigrants to North America, be it Canada or the U.S. We are countries full of immigrants, and this insanity around around the xenophobia about immigrants coming into the country destroying. To me, it was nuts, and I felt that there was an opportunity to tell a story that told a greater story about immigrants and the value of immigrants. So this film is a story about a group of Jewish immigrants who came escaping the pogroms in Russia in the 20s, or escaping the Second World War, or having somehow managed to live through the Second World War, the camps, and arrived here in Toronto in Canada with nothing, and again, face some of the same issues that the Indigenous peoples faced. There was huge prejudice, discrimination. They weren't allowed to be part of all kinds of professions. They had to find a way to live, and yet they had nothing. They arrived with nothing, and they somehow found a way to build a life and build community, build family, and create an industry in this country, and a kind of um, uh, opportunity, this affordable apartment rental model, which didn't exist before, which allowed, they built like 500,000 units, and up until rent controls, it allowed over 1 million people to come. Toronto grew by 1 million people and gave immigrants a place to get a good start. And if you look at it like with kids, that 0 to 6 good start, it's sort of similar, as opposed to people going. They built great apartments, and they built them with thinking about family, thinking about people living with respect and decency. And so, as opposed to immigrants coming and to a New York or somewhere like that and living in a basement slums and tenements with no hot and cold running water, with rats and stuff like that. They built places people could move into and live with self-respect. And Toronto had waves and waves of immigrants that came through that lived in these buildings. That was their stepping off point. And over that period of time, from the 50s to when rent controls came in, Toronto really transformed because of those communities and the contributions that they made to the city, from being again, xenophobic, backwater, prejudiced, discriminatory city, where Jews and Catholics couldn't walk in certain
Couldn't
areas
walk
and
on Yonge
certain
Street.
streets, couldn't walk on Yonge Street. It's unbelievable.
It is kind of unbelievable, and I think we need to be shocked out of our complacency about these things. It's so easy to you can't forget what you don't know, but sometimes you don't even want to really know. Like that is the power of the ideological implications of some of you as a storyteller, of the stories you choose to tell, and the things that kind of seep in under the surface, which is why I just so love documentary film and just film in general. It's doing layered work, if you know what I mean. It's pushing back against that status quo mindset. But yeah, when you see those images, you go, that's not Toronto, is it? Right? Like there's this wow, right? And it's just this we need to be shocked out of our complacency, Ron.
Without question. And I guess what's interesting is very much a result of that. Not that they planned that. They were thinking, oh, this is what this is gonna accomplish. There are reasons for doing it. You can get that in the film, but very much as a result of that and that growth and those immigrant groups coming into Toronto and their contribution to Toronto, to Ontario, Toronto became arguably one of the most successful multicultural cities in the world from that. So,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's
The
hope
stepping
in that,
stones,
right?
right? I mean,
But there's hope
the
in that. Yeah.
metaphors, right? Building, construction, laying foundations, right? Paving the road, the way forward. I love how somebody, Ron, in the film refers to the buildings, these apartments that are so, I guess, uniform in a sense, and may not be in some cases even places that lots of people would want to live, but he calls them irreplaceable assets.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw one of the connections, providing a space, yes, for people to come in outside of the rain, but also for people to build families, to create communities, to tell stories, to listen to one another. And it's just, honestly, it reframes kind of everything, right? And it's seeing the city through that type of a lens it's good, it's beautiful, and it's true. Like I gotta say, I loved both of these films, Ron. I love your work, and I hope that continues. Sadly, we got to wrap up in a few minutes. And are you planning on releasing a fourth film this year? You only have a few months left, Ron, and you might have to
No,
pick up. Okay, good, good. I
no,
don't know if that's a good
done
thing or
for
not.
this year. I'm
Not
done.
for this year. The films are From Earth to Sky, Shelter, Chapman, not a plural, chapmanproductions.ca. Ron, you got to say a word or two just because before we hit record today here on Face to Face. And by the way, if you're enjoying what I'm doing here, please leave us a review on iTunes. We'd really appreciate that. Like us on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, be always a big help. Ron, tell us about your next project, and maybe we'll have you back in a couple more years to talk about that. It sounds like a lot of fun. Can you give us a little
Yeah,
taste?
for sure. I'm doing a film now on the Toronto Rock and Roll Revival. It's I guess one of the great untold stories of the summer of '69. Now that Summer of Soul has been out, and it's about a festival that didn't get a lot of recognition worldwide, and deserves it. Rolling Stone called it the second most important event in rock history, and it happened in Toronto. Um, a promoter wanted to bring all the rock and roll greats and show the kids who these people were, and he brought in Bo Diddley and Jerry Lee Lewis and Little Richard and Gene Vincent and a bunch of the greats, Chuck Berry, and yet ticket sales didn't really happen. So we started adding a bunch of other groups, and the Doors ended up being added on in Chicago, and Alice Cooper, some others. But eventually, a day or two before the concert, John Lennon, these were all his heroes. He decided that he would come and play the festival. And he came with Yoko, and it was so it ended up being the first performance of any of the Beatles, and certainly John's first performance, not as a Beatle, as John Lennon, which was
Right,
something that
right.
he was transforming through to, with Yoko as they built their vision of what their world would be like, their artistic world and collaboration would be like, because they were collaborating like crazy on all kinds of stuff, and it was leading to the end of the Beatles, and it was an incredibly important concert for John, and really it's one that is said that gave him the confidence to move forward and leave the group. His final, this is it.
Right.
I just went and played. It was a gas. It was just me, John Lennon, with my band, and I can put this band or any band together. And now I'm going to go off and be a creative as John Lennon. So
Yes.
that's certainly a part of the story, but the story is also about D.A. Pennebaker, who made Don't Look Back, who made Monterey Pop, who really is seen and credited with discovering verite documentary filmmaking, that fly on the wall kind of thing. He came and shot the concert at the last minute. It's a fantastic story about how he pulled that together, and I collaborated with D.A. Pennebaker and son Fraser and his wife Chris Hegedus from Hegedus Pennebaker Hegedus Productions, and they became co-producers on it with me, and I have access to all of his
It's
unseen
remarkable.
footage, unseen acts, and I've been through it. I spent a week, actually, probably about 50 something hours of footage that's never been seen, never before seen,
Amazing.
performances on the film. And so that is a great story. That's part of my story, as well as the promoter, John Brower, who is like a 22-year-old who didn't know that what he was doing was impossible and couldn't happen.
Right, right. Sounds a lot like the subjects of your other films. What was the other line? What was the other line from Shelter? We didn't need permission to be entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
That's a great takeaway, a great lesson. And the indigenous architects of From Earth to Sky, and they didn't need permission either. I mean, for me, it was, From Earth to Sky is kind of a protest story in a way. This, Cardinal, how he stepped in and said, "I'm going to do it anyway." I mean, it's brilliant. It's genius. The new film sounds like a lot of fun. I hope you get Bob Dylan to write a little bit of the soundtrack. That would be awesome. Let me know if that happens. And Ron, what a pleasure having you today on Face to Face. Thank you again. From Earth to Sky, Shelter. Look for those films at chapmanproductions.ca, and hopefully coming soon to a theater near you somewhere around the world. Ron, pleasure having you today again, and look forward to seeing you face to face.
Thanks so much. Pleasure being back with you again, and just truly a pleasure doing your show. So thank you.
Thanks. So there you have it. Ron Chapman on Face to Face talking about his two new films, From Earth to Sky, Shelter, a new production about a late 1969, I believe, affair in Toronto connected to pretty much rock and roll history across the board. So stay tuned for that. What a pleasure having Ron back on the show. 400 episodes ago, Ron appeared on Face to Face at episode 170. Check that out online. Hope you get to see the film. Don't forget chapmanproductions.ca to learn more about these films and about the work that Ron's up to. And also davidpecklive.com for more information about the writing and the speaking and the podcasting that I do. Please sign up for our newsletter on Face to Face. Like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and we would really appreciate it. And this would be huge. Would appreciate a review on iTunes, and forward these interviews to your family and friends. Talk about us on social, even if it's just a little bit. It can go a long way. Thanks so much. We will see you again very soon here on Face to Face.